So I'd like to start today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and to pay our respects to both elders past and present, and I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples that are here today. Welcome to what is an absolutely fabulous afternoon. Thank you all for your attendance today. My name's Melissa McInerney and I'll be emceeing the event today, and I'm very privileged to be asked to be in that role. For a little bit of background, I've known Adrienne Maloney for a little over 30 years now, so have shared some absolutely fabulous times with this incredibly talented young lady, and as part of that have been very much welcomed into the Maloney family and with Carmel. So thank you for the honour of being here today with you all. I'll manage some housekeeping matters first. So the sales table, as you know, is being manned by Beth, and there's certainly a lot of helpful people around who are ready to help and support you in purchasing anything that you need, and they'll be wearing the lanyards. We've got the loud fence ribbons available on the sales table as well, and bathrooms are obviously to my right. So I'd like to take the opportunity to welcome Juliana Addison, Member for Wendouree, and the Honourable Catherine King, Member for Ballarat, Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government. But I would also like to acknowledge and welcome you all for your attendance today, and to those absent, who many in this room continue to carry their voice. I thank you for your tremendous support to Carmel and Adrienne, and for your continued courage. In thinking about what to say in a book launch, I thought, well, let's just start with what is the written word. And the written word connects us to each other. It connects us in the presence, and it gives us access to the past, and it opens us up to possible futures. It influences our lives in ways both subtle and inescapable, and it gives us entry into understanding ourselves and others. You have contributed to such an important piece of work to ensure that the voices of those not heard has been heard and will never be forgotten. When a book is well written, there is no need to create further words. So I take this opportunity to read to you part of the foreword by Laurie Maloney. The book of the Quilt of Hope is destined for proud and public display, acknowledging a million tortured words, a million desperate tears, reflecting the hopes of all mothers, of all invested in the care of children. Crafted with love and patience and defiance, it speaks for the many who have been silenced, who will no longer be silenced. It speaks for itself. Today you will hear from our speakers, Paul Tatchell, who's been a great supporter of Carmel and provided immense support to the book. You'll hear from Anne Ryan, who features in the book, and her writing contributes to one of the chapters. You'll also obviously hear from Adrienne and Carmel Maloney, two of the most inspirational people I know. Followed by the speakers, we'll officially launch the book, and then we will have food served and also some entertainment. So without further ado, I'm going to pass to Paul.
Well, firstly, thank you very much and welcome everybody. I feel a little bit underdone. There's some great speakers in this room and they picked an old rat bag like me, but anyhow, we started this journey over 30 years ago, and for those that are unaware, there was a lot of people that aren't here today and a lot of people that worked incredibly hard to do something that at the time was considered incredibly difficult, and most people said it would never happen. That was the feeling at the time. It didn't work politically for anybody. It didn't work emotionally for a lot of people. But more importantly, we had this great divide, and it was divided by silence. And nobody wanted to step forward because of that silence. And here we are 30 odd years later. And it's been tragic in a lot of ways. A lot of people, in my mind over that 30 years, that I'll never see again. But I well remember grown men and women that become children very quickly. And it was incredibly difficult for people to get that out there and get the understanding that was required to make sure that if they're going to write in tears, it couldn't be invisible ink. And I suppose from my perspective, and I have to thank people like Julia Gillard, who had the foresight many years ago to go against the tide and bring things into the open and talk about it so that we didn't lose more people. Ultimately, what it did give us though was an insight into the work that was done in the back room. To Kevin Carsons that's here today. Kevin, always a pleasure. Kevin and I were into football together for many years, had no idea we were working in the same space. Blair Smith is retired down in Melbourne. I remember he walked into a hotel I owned in Melbourne 30 odd years ago and he said, "You this bloke they call Tatch, they tell me you've got a few secrets, can you help us out?" And here we are 30 years later. A lot of people from Warrnambool, ex-coppers that were shunned at the time, that were trying to help and trying to do something, that were pushed back by the establishment. It was an incredibly difficult time. So fast forward to about a little over 10 years ago, and a gentleman named Frank Sheen rang me. And I have to say there was a big lump in my throat when I seen Rosalie when I was walking across the car park. I mean, anyone who ever met Frank Sheen was certainly touched by him. Frank was the everyman. He was, one thing I'll say about the relationship I had with Frank, if I'm ever half the man that he was, that'd be a big improvement. He, every time I spent time with Frank, I walked away wanting to be a better person and aspiring to be like Frank. And unfortunately we lost Frank. And I well remember Frank rang me one day and he said, "Tatch," he said, "we're going to go to the cathedral, the church." He said, "Opposite the ABC there." He said, "We're going to create a bridge between the divide between all of us, the parishioners, the clergy, the victims." And I said, "Whatever you do, don't tell George because he'll bring in the exorcist because he thinks I'm the Antichrist." But we did go and do it because it was important. It was important especially in Ballarat. We had this enormous black cloud that just dawned on us all of a sudden. It seemed to have come from nowhere. And all of a sudden, when you walk down the streets, everything was just a little bit quieter. The churches were a little bit thinner on the Sunday when they walked out of the cathedral. People that you normally would associate with stepped back rather than forward. It became an incredibly difficult time for a very close-knit community. And I talk about the community in the wider sense to Western Victoria, because Ballarat's sort of always been the heart of everything that happened. It was an extraordinary time. And then we had a state commission, then a royal commission. And I know Chrissy Foster here today has worked tirelessly and had her own losses post this. The tragedies don't end. But moving towards justice was a different thing altogether. And the day I walked into this group of people that I was always thinking, do we really need to be in this? Do we, is it all going too far? All of a sudden I met this group of people that said, we can talk about the problems, we can talk about the disaster, but why don't we start talking about how we're going to fix it? Because that's what's missing in the conversation. And that's where I had the extraordinary pleasure to meet the Maloneys. Carl, who, there's no secret I've been in love with Carl for the day I met her. And then to meet the rest of the family, they are just extraordinary people. They're people that, despite what was inside them spiritually, it was about fixing the problem. It was putting some common sense back into it, putting the realities of life back into it. Let's face it, life is not perfect. But in the end, we're all responsible for it. We're responsible for those changes. And sometimes that means that we have to move closer together, even when it's a little bit uncomfortable. There are times when we have to agree to disagree, but move on, because at the end of the day, the only way this was ever going to be fixed is by somebody not writing it in tears in that invisible ink, but to actually put it together, to actually make it work. And the best way to do that was a compilation of the people that had been either at arm's length, struck by the tragedies, that knock-on effect, that thing that happens that we can't control, that thing where you can't get a pill for it, that thing that just all of a sudden it comes down to earth and says to you, this is the reality. This is the reality that we live in today, and only we can fix it. And then enter my favourite girl, Adrienne, who just says, that's all right, we'll just write a book. Yeah, well, one thing we got, Frank wants to go to church with me, now we're going to write a book. And I wouldn't write in the book because the story is yours. The story is yours, not mine. The work that went into this and the people that were brave enough, and I can't believe the extraordinary courage it takes for someone to sit down with a word processor, a typewriter, or even a cartridge pen or an ink pen, and write down the things that they keep inside of them that have hurt them in such a dramatic way, knowing full well that at some point in time it was going to be there for everybody to read. They were going to give a piece of themselves to make it work, to make people understand. And in years and years to come, one thing about, I love books. Everyone gets on that social media and everybody jumps in there and types away. It doesn't mean anything. In 100 years or 200 years' time, someone will see this as a period of time where genuine, decent, normal, everyday people, not trained writers, got out the ink and wrote from the heart into this little book. And someone will pick that up and read it and will understand it for whatever period of time that is. That it doesn't matter what happens in this world, the only thing, or the only people that can fix it is us. If we make the mess, we clean it up. We don't always know why it happened, but we have to do it. And we've seen through the ages, every time we've said, look, this isn't going so well, I think we've got a current problem with the bloke over in Russia that gets a bit excited. Well, it'll be people that'll stop that. It won't be a science, it won't be a pill. This book is the heart and soul of a community of people. It's what they felt. It's the pain that they went through. It's an understanding of where we really sit in this world and how important it is that we continue to connect. How important it is that we continue to talk about stuff that may be a little bit uncomfortable, might not suit us at the time. That's how important it is. So to finish off, Adrian, if you just come up here, I cannot believe the amount of work that goes into this. I mean, it's one thing to write a book, it's another thing to get it published, but to live this, work at the same time, bring up your child, do it from Brisbane, keep everyone informed with that, with the newsletter, and then here we are, and there it is. This person, day and night, worked at full hours, worked 2 jobs, I think, 3 jobs, sorry, 3 jobs, and still managed to put it together. And this is the first book launch I've ever been to where I haven't actually read the book. Because it's that fresh. I think just watch you don't get ink on yourself when you buy one over there at the counter. But please buy one, and buy one for your friends as well, so that they understand. That's all part of sharing, and it's all part of what this is all about. It's to make sure that people know, to make sure that we as people can stop these things simply by speaking out, and just for a minute putting aside all of our differences and touching each other and saying, hey, we're all in the same boat. We're all in the same boat, and help people. So I could not be prouder of the work that Adrienne's done, and her mum, and just the heart and the dedication and the reality of doing this, and the bravery and the courage of the people in this room that wrote the stories. So thank you very much. I will read it tonight. I am excited. I couldn't bring my wife today, she had to work, but she's very excited to read it. But I think the overall message in this however you read it is, that we're all in this together, and ultimately, if we've got problems in this world, the only people who will fix it will be us. So thank you very much.
Paul, thank you so much. Incredibly powerful, incredibly moving, and I think, you know, the message is for me the power of people, the courage in the room, and something that you will have to go on with and people will read in future. Thank you. I'm going to introduce Anne now. Thank you, Anne.
Thanks, Melissa. Well, what a hard act to follow. I'd also like to do an acknowledgement to country. Today we are gathered on the ancestral country of the Wadawurrung and Dja Dja Wurrung nations, traditional caretakers of the lands and waterways which surround our place of assembly. I am respectfully mindful of all First Nations peoples' continuing connection to their country, their culture and their communities, of their enduring connection to the ecosystems of the rivers, lakes, wetlands and shorelands, to all the varied landscapes and to the plants and animals endemic to this island continent. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, acknowledging their continuing journey for justice, their struggle for a voice, and I extend the hand of friendship to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, especially to those with us today. And I'd also like to quickly acknowledge Paul's words of rawness and truth-telling is what we need. There's just been not enough of that. And I'm also honoured and humbled to be in this spot today. We are primarily gathered to celebrate the enduring struggle, completion and release of Adrian's book, which Paul alluded to. But it goes deeper. The book is now an associate of a most amazing quilt, the Quilt of Hope. And as the arts have done forever, but especially within the art of quilt making, acted as keys to our engagement with aspects of our humanity, so often creating a collective conduit for desperate but sometimes hopeful voices, often depicting something beautiful, but just as often depicting struggle. This quilt speaks of something so offensive to our collective sense of what it is to be human, so unspeakable, where forever voices have been denied, disbelieved, even demonised. Whilst many lived with hope, far too many succumbed to despair and only found relief through addiction or death. Adrian's book is artfully aligned to real stories from this Catholic diocese of Ballarat. It offers to the reader a keener insight to the truth of the suffering and struggle of innumerable Ballarat diocesan children. Children and their families who were forced, through church policy, to exist within the depths of an incredibly pulsating pain. One that has remained ever present, unacknowledged. When first I viewed the Quilt of Hope, I was overcome with emotion. The inherent and compelling force of its potential reached out and grabbed me, floored me. Its underlying compassion and empathy, its promise for facilitating truth-telling and healing. It was ready to travel and spend time throughout the diocese. But parishes did not respond as I would have hoped. Why was that? Who was it that denied diocesan parishioners that opportunity to weep, to initiate some truth-telling and reconciliation? And how can hope breathe in such a context? Allow me to share a story because it is through our shared stories that we feel our humanness, that our collective voice grows stronger and louder. 40 years ago, a young Catholic school teacher from one of those diocesan community schools suffered an acutely chilling awakening. Her years 5 and 6 students had been sexually assaulted or raped by the parish priest in the parish for the 18 months prior to his hurried departure. Decades later, she learned through a personal letter from a now 45-year-old past student that he had been brutally and anally raped in the confessional as an 8-year-old innocent, left there alone until he was given permission to leave. We say that our children are so precious that we cannot bear to see harm come their way, but it did, big time, and collective parish communities allowed it. Why would she say that? You may see it as harsh judgment, but it is what happened. Unbelievable pushback. Those who found ways to raise concerns were silenced, including herself. For 7 years, she scanned diligently at every parish gathering in so many conversations, including those with school mothers. She was closed down, first by their ridicule, with words like, "Don't be so naive, Jerry has been interfering with the boys," and then by sustained silence. The school teacher may have appeared naive, but she needed no explanation to realise that those words spoke of abominable atrocities. Why was there no collective parish action at the time? Had duty and loyalty to church been placed above love? Stalemate until 1989. This was the year in which the young school teacher became aware of the identities of some victims, now young teenagers in the town, some of them really acting up in the community. So what did she do? She knocked on the doors of families identified, prepared to accept whatever happened. But every knock was the beginning of an ongoing friendship. She organised a representative from Morris Blackburn Lawyers to come down from Melbourne at their own expense to talk to this small group of parents about their legal options. None took up the options, nor would they consider speaking with police. Some had already been to head office back at the time of the crimes, but to no avail. They had lost hope for any just outcome and continued to seek comfort within their religious faith. But what of the children who had their lives stolen? What of the children who could never tell anyone? What of the children who continued to live through the priest's home visits, home masses and family meals, not knowing when he might suffer the next atrocity? His parents seemingly unaware. Prepubescent children do not have the language or the confidence to verbalise such behaviour. And besides, how could they speak out against the priest, their parents' trusted friend? The teacher was fascinated to learn that many of the children, whilst in the schoolyard, spoke of it amongst themselves, implying danger, warning younger ones not to get caught alone with Jerry. But I wonder what stopped them from telling significant others. Between 1989 and 1995, the school teacher wrote to and visited Bishop Mulkern's numerous times, her last visit being in February 2016, the day prior to his video appearance with the Royal Commission. She wrote numerous letters to the Council of Priests, the Special Issues Committee and the Interim Diocesan Pastoral Council without any positive result. She then turned her letter writing to the local, very supportive newspaper and in 1996 participated in an ABC TV Four Corners program, Twice Betrayed, which raised Ballarat Catholic Diocese issues of child sexual abuse and the associated cover-up. It also raised the bar of retribution in her Catholic workplace. In her Catholic life and as a passionate believer in people having a voice, she had convened a few parish assemblies, appointed co-facilitator of 1993's inaugural Diocesan Assembly, an initiative of Bishop Mulcairn's and planned by the interim Diocesan Pastoral Council, of which she was a member. Described in the Diocesan Bulletin, Our Diocesan Community, as a serious and well-planned attempt to offer the people of our diocese an opportunity to participate in the life of the Church, to follow up concerns expressed at earlier parish and regional assemblies. Unfortunately, there was not much positive action on the other end of the assembly. People seemed flat-footed, lacking in initiative or direction. What was stopping them? Who was stopping them? So, understandably, as the 1994 Assembly neared, she was already questioning its authenticity. The issue of sexual abuse had been denied an official spot. She was low on energy, really not interested in attending. However, she did, and from a small group discussion, had an opportunity at the microphone. Silence. No comments, no questions, just as there had been in the small group discussion. However, at the closing of the day, two different mothers approached her in private conversation to relate their family story of clerical sexual abuse. The insidious elements of these crimes bring with them so much shame, fear, disbelief, and confusion. Any genuine pathway to justice consciously made so difficult, obstructed. Why was it so? At that same assembly, Bishop Mulcairns had posed the possibility of small Christian communities in parishes, diocesan blessing not required. Whilst he was not necessarily promoting parish family groups, it seemed the easier option and was built along a similar pathway, which promised to offer authentic contexts for small groups. The school teacher had some difficult conversations with the parish priest, and eventually the program was established and strongly supported. Why did he resist? What was he frightened of? Again, the upbeat language of our diocesan community reported that the coming together as a diocese was a refreshing experience, broadening our perspective on church, fueling us with energy, enthusiasm, and especially hope to go back to our parishes with the good news that our Catholic Church is definitely alive. We know because we can feel it. This was simply not true. The Second Diocesan Assembly and child sexual abuse is still not being addressed. The word sexual abuse written once only within a promotion for the Diocesan Special Issues Committee, which had been set up by the Bishop to listen and help with concerns about sexual abuse. Back in September 1993, Warrnambool's Emmanuel College Inc. newsletter number 30 announced the Christian Brothers Operation Helpline, which had already received about 300 calls. Christian Brothers College Warrnambool was the school teacher's first posting, and as she was to discover, through personal contact with an ex-student, almost 50 years on, was rife with this heinous crime in 1970. Why did it require 40 years plus into the future for a royal commission to break open the truth? And what was happening in the intervening years? It is true that Bishop Malkerns did not always present as a strong leader, but he was certainly diligent in his duty to both papacy and Holy See. But was he trying to reach the laity in his January 1994 pastoral letter? When writing about his 1993 ad limina visit to Rome, he offered quite personal feedback. He wrote, "Finally, I spoke to the Holy Father about the hurt caused to many in the diocese and to the morale of our priests and laity by reason of the tragic incidents of sexual abuse and breach of trust. The Pope was interested in and concerned about all of these issues, and he reminded me of the experience of Christ and of the stress he felt at Gethsemane, and that being in agony, he prayed the longer. I felt that this was no trite response, no pious platitude, but was in fact the successor of Peter, confirming one of his brothers in the episcopate." Bishop Malkerns was being too kind, because during her first 1994 visit with him, which may have also been her last, the cruelty of that papal encounter was revealed. Pope John Paul II did not make it easy. However, the bishop persisted in what he had to do and was successful in having paedophile priest Gerald Francis Ridsdale returned to the lay state. Later in that same year, his Advent pastoral letter devoted substantial space to the need for diocesan soul-searching, reconciliation and healing needed by those affected by sexual abuse. He referred to the need for compassion in our shared helplessness. Was he saying something about himself there? Being a servant of the Church, perhaps he too was just as powerless as the laity. In the school teacher's parish, copies of his pastoral letter were placed in a pile in the church porch, alluded to with just one sentence on the parish bulletin, not, as you might expect, broached at length by the priest. Why do you think that is? How supportive of the bishop were his priests? Is their role more about maintaining the lethargy and disempowerment of the laity? How else can one interpret the perceived lack of collective action by the laity? Their misplaced loyalties only serving to reveal the depth of ingrained indoctrination, fear and power welded over them by Catholicism, practices in place since the reign of Charlemagne. The Janus-faced nature of this church may not yet have met its nemesis, but thankfully those years were already poised on the horizon. The school teacher lost all hope during those years. The church, once such a significant player in her life, had by now revealed itself in the fullness of its disturbing and toxic truth. Her own children had grown and left the nest. Time to denounce her Catholic faith forever and embrace atheism. Having completed her university studies, she moved into adult education, finding peace and magic in becoming a sleeper until mid-2012. It was after the Victorian parliamentary inquiry's Ballarat hearing that the school teacher had an opportunity to catch up with her 1982 principal, who recalled her efforts to get help for the children. She had approached Bishop Ronald Malkerns face to face, but his response stated that there would be nothing done for the children because that would be admitting guilt. She was sworn to silence. However, the bishop's words are now recorded publicly and forever in the reports of both the Victorian Parliamentary Inquiry and that of the Royal Commission. This was also the time in which the school teacher became aware of Ballarat's moving towards justice group, the advocacy group who instigated the quilt. The group whom she now looks upon as her liberators. It was appropriate in 2013 that she spoke plainly to the inquiry, and some months later an MTJ group member, John, sought her out and lobbied for her story to be represented on the beautifully pertinent artwork. And so here we are again in the town that is the diocesan headquarters of the Roman Catholic Church. 9 years on, 5 of those taken up by the Royal Commission. And sadly, the reasons for speaking plainly remain fundamentally unchanged. However, nothing remains buried forever. The past does not die, it waits. It waits for truth and justice to rise up. And we are gathered in that very moment. It has without doubt been a waiting story for our First Nations people, but today's gathering is concentrated on another waiting story. A waiting story shared by both survivors and advocates, caught up in the appalling scourge of child sexual abuse. A human atrocity which slithered like a viper into every nook and cranny of Ballarat diocesan communities, Roman Catholic communities. The inundation knowing no boundaries, plying its poison into undiscerning communities, not only nationally but universally. That school teacher and sleeper is me, and my quilt block honours the first Celtic Christianised Bridget who believed that we live in the shelter of each other. Which returns us to the main event, a happy event hopefully, a celebration of the human spirit in all its fragility and strength. Adrianne's book, driven initially by her outrage at discovering the truth held within the quilt. Such appalling crimes against humanity, against children, what to do, how to raise awareness, make these stories more accessible. A book might do the trick. Take the reader behind the quilt's blocks and into their inherent painful truth. All in the hope of raising a constructive consciousness, but one that has a call to action attached. That is the hope. And collectively we congratulate and celebrate this young woman, along with the people who walked with her to today's event. One of the most present being her mother, Carmel, who has never let go of the rein. That's going to break me up, providing steadfast support and encouragement. I present you to a newly published author, Adrianne.
And now I am really overwhelmed. Big breath. What can I say? I've got a speech that I've written a couple of different ways, so I'll just roll with it. Thank you to the two speakers that we've had. I'm feeling very humbled at the celebration that it's about me, because it's most certainly not about me. I might just pull this down because I'm little. That's better. I'll just move that back. I do want to start with quoting the book, but it's a very poignant quote that hit me very hard, and I only came across this about 6 weeks ago, this particular quote. Silence, they say, is the voice of complicity, but silence is impossible. Silence screams. Silence is the message, just as doing nothing is an act. And when I came across that, that is very much the theme of the book, and the theme that has gone on way too long, as many of you know. The purpose of our book and the purpose of writing it is to provide a vehicle for voice, to break that silence and to contribute to continue to break down that silence, and for voices to be heard. It contributes to breaking down the deafening silence. There's different ways I've heard the word silence mentioned to me over the last 3 to 4 years through this project, and that has been a very key theme. It's loud. The silence is very loud, and it is most certainly deafening. Our book tells the story, it's a story about a quilt, which can sound very lovely. It's a very powerful quilt, and in the book it tells you how it was made, the people involved, the context and the why it was created. It also then shares some stories of parishioners, mothers, and truth seekers. And I use the word truth seeker because we can say that they're whistleblowers, and this was something that really still bugs me a bit. It has a negative connotation, and yet people are truth seekers. They seek the truth and they're brave enough to share that truth. It provides those voices, and it's in their words. I've worked really hard to bring those words into the book. I can't tell this story. It's not my story, it's not my journey. It's other people's, so that's been my challenge, to bring those stories within. The stories that have been selected and have been included sadly reflect the stories of many. And those that have experienced various journeys, when they read these stories, they're going to see their own life in that story, even though it's a specific story to someone. It's been a collaborative project, and again, I am humbled to be the one that's being the author. I most certainly am not single on this. I wrote this book with other people, and many of those are in this room today, so I'm absolutely indebted to those that have trusted me with their stories, trusted me with their words, and worked with me to shape their words, every little sentence and every little word. It's been a wonderful journey that I've shared. There's many people to thank. They're countless, so I didn't bother doing a list because that would just be too hard and I'd miss out on someone. It's been a long journey. Well, it's been a journey. There are many people to thank, and there are a couple that aren't here today. One in particular we do need to thank is Mike Pera. And he has gently nagged me for a number of years now to get the book finished. And it is just such a shame that Mike can't be here today to share in this celebration. We'd also like to acknowledge Lynn. Lynn Snipson was a member of MTJ, and she has written MTJ's story, which is in the book. So Lynn can't be with us, so I'd like to acknowledge those people. Again, I can't express how much gratitude I have for people trusting me. And people having faith in me that I can do this, and reminding me to keep going, you can do this. One person in particular that I do want to thank, and I don't think I can look at him and I potentially am going to start tearing up, is Laurie Maloney, who... Laurie, can you stand up? Because you're just marvellous and you're so important to me. Come on, up you get. Thank you. Thank you. So not only does Laurie spell his Maloney the correct way, and he's part of our tribe, if I didn't have Laurie walking with me along the side of this and reassuring me that all writers think their work is rubbish, all writers think it's not good enough, all writers think that, there's no way I'll be standing right here in front of you, so I cannot express how much gratitude that I have for you, Laurie, and in your patience in gently guiding me and giving me those reassurances. That's been really important, so thank you, Laurie, much appreciated. So I have covered that bit as I knew I would, just talk and not really follow cards, so I'll just keep flicking the cards. So it was 4 years ago that Mum and I had a conversation. I remembered I was walking in my backyard, chatting away to Mum, and the quilt was in a local museum here in Ballarat, and Mum thought it'd be nice to have a pamphlet. Let's have a pamphlet to go next to the quilt, because it was on display and it's too important not to have that information. So we talked about a pamphlet which would have been easy to whip up. That pamphlet turned into a book. So as we made the decision we couldn't do the pamphlet for various reasons, I said to Mum, because she kept sharing the stories of the people behind these quilts, and amazing people, amazing stories that you just wonder how are you still standing? How are you able to share your story? And just amazing. There's another person I can't look at because I will start crying. So I just did casually say to Mum, we should write these stories down. Like, let's capture the oral history before we can't. Let's do it now. These voices need to be heard. And we run a little printing business, so in my head, we were just going to do them up and I was going to print them out and we could bind them and, you know, a few people would have copies. We did not envision this. We didn't envision such a beautiful, beautiful book. We didn't see any of this, and there has been some occasions for Mum and I, many occasions really. It just feels surreal, and we've giggled about how crazy this has got and how important it is. So that's where it's been transformed from. Throughout the writing journey, so as I mentioned, it's been 4 years since the idea. Aside from multiple jobs and small business and parenting and all the other things that we do in life, I really felt the weight of the responsibility of this book. I didn't quite know how to write it. I didn't know what it was going to look like. There was a whole heaps of didn'ts. And the weight of authenticity, of making it a book that is actually authentic, because I can't write people's voices, it's their voice. And of course with COVID, that prevented me from doing any travel. I live in Queensland, any travel at all that I had planned to do, to sit and have a cup of tea with people and meet with them and hear their stories. So I was really challenged with that, and that weight was very heavy for a number of years. And again, I credit to a number of people, but particularly Laurie for helping me move through that. And as I said to someone earlier, getting out of my own way, getting rid of my ego and saying this is actually more important than you. It's not about you. Just get on with it and do what you can. I'm extremely proud of what we've achieved, and to be honest, I've only really felt that the last month, of how proud we are of it. It's a good book, and it's a good book because it's a powerful book, and it's an important book, and it's one that's absolutely needed. And I know that when Mum and I were talking about, half joking almost, let's write a book, we knew it had to be written because a pamphlet wasn't going to do the job. The quilt deserved more, and the quilt actually demanded more, that we have these voices come out in terms of that. So it's probably all I do have to say. I was going to make it short and sweet. I wasn't sure what to share with you today. Thank you so much for coming and supporting the book and those sorts of things. It very much does touch us, and I get pretty excited that people are excited about the book. And probably one thing that inspired me of when I read the MTJ story, which helped feed for me to be thinking and why I should be writing this, inspirational people, that when they did see evil, they didn't just sit and say, gee, that's really bad, that's awful. They actually did something. And in particular, and this probably will make me start crying, but in particular was my mum. Take a breath, and I can't look at her because she's probably crying right now. So I read a book about a group of people that were in their 70s. They heard about atrocities that were going on in a church they had been dedicated to for their lives, as had their parents, as had their parents. And they didn't not do anything. They did something. They did what they could do. Grappling with an unbearable truth, they took action as best as they could. And I think it's pretty amazing that the end result or a tangible outcome of that action is the quilt. And you can come up, and it's obviously not the quilt, is the quilt. So it was my absolute, not only my honour and my privilege to be in the position that I was able to do this. I had the skill set to do this. I was doing this. I did this for my mum because she's an inspiration. And I think anyone in this room would think that. And she's not good at accolades at all. I really had to work hard to push Mum to write a chapter about her and her role in this. And I know for today that my mum, my Carmel, you are truly my inspiration, my guide and my mentor. And there is no way I would be standing here without your unconditional love and all of the support and all of the faith. You just think, I can do anything. And I can do some stuff, which is today. So I would actually like to invite my mum up right now. She doesn't want to say much. You can say thank you. You can see she's still rebelling in terms of that. You can say a quick thank you. So I'll get mum a quick thank you and then we'll officially launch the book.
It's all in the book. I've said it all. I've lit a fuse and I'm leaving Ballarat tomorrow. But thank you. And I mean, you don't often get an opportunity to do something that's significant. But it's been the journey I've shared with so many wonderful people that I look at everyone in this room and somewhere along the way you've come into my life and you've made me a better person. Thank you.
Well, what a just privileged afternoon. Can I just say again, I think a round of applause for our incredible speakers in Paul and Adrienne. And you all recall the quiet bulldozer that is Carmel Maloney. So thank you all. So that ends the formal part of today, but please stay on. We've got some afternoon tea and tea, coffee and of course the band. So thank you again all for your attendance. Thank you.